Welcome to Algebra 2. Today we're going to be talking about completing the square. Completing the square is going to be a way for us to solve quadratic functions when we do not have integer solutions, or when we don't have solutions that we can easily find. So we're first going to talk about something called the square root property. Essentially what the square root property tells us is that if we have x squared equals some number a, we can take the square root of both sides, and then x is equal to plus or minus the square root of a. We're just going to take that and apply it to a quadratic. So here, if we have x plus b over 2 squared equaling k, then we could essentially take the square root of both sides. Then x plus b over 2 would equal plus or minus k. From there, to get the x alone, we would just subtract the b over 2 over. So we'd have a negative b over 2 plus or minus that square root of k. That's essentially what the square root property is. So we're going to start off by just trying to solve for the square root property. Since we're solving for the square root property, the quadratic that we're given here should be a perfect square. So if we tried to factor x squared plus 10x plus 25, this factors to x plus 5 times x plus 5, because 5 times 5 gives us our last term of 25. 5x plus 5x, our outside and inside, gives us our 10x. Another way we could write this is x plus 5 squared equals 49. Now from here, using our square root property, we could take the square root of both sides. So now we have x plus 5 is equal to the square root of 49 is 7, and since we took the square root of both sides, it would be plus or minus 7. Now to get the x alone, we would subtract 5 from both sides. So we have negative 5 plus or minus 7. This is two separate answers, negative 5 plus 7, which gives us 2, and negative 5 minus 7, which gives us negative 12. So our two solutions here are negative 12 and 2. Okay, let's try another one. X squared minus 6x plus 9 is equal to 32. X squared minus 6x plus 9 can factor to x minus 3 times x minus 3. This is true because negative 3 times negative 3 gives us our 9. Our outside, negative 3x, and our inside, negative 3x, gives us our negative 6x. So we can rewrite this as x minus 3 squared is equal to 32. And then from here, we would use our square root property. We would take the square root of both sides. So x minus 3 would equal plus or minus. Now, the square root of 32 we don't know exactly, but we do know that the square root of 32 has a perfect square of 16 in there. It's 16 times 2. And the square root of 16 is 4. So square root of 32 simplifies down to 4 square root of 2. So this is plus or minus 4 square root of 2. To get the x alone, we would then add 3 to both sides. So here, x is equal to 3 plus or minus 4 square root of 2. And we would just leave our solution like that because we don't know exactly what the square root of 2 is. Now, not all quadratics are going to be set up nicely like these two were, where they were perfect squares. So sometimes we're going to have to create that ourselves. So that's what we're going to do next, is we're going to find the value of c that we can add on that will make this quadratic a perfect square. So here we have x squared plus 12x plus c. So we need to figure out what number could we add on here that would make it a perfect square. Well, in order for us to have gotten 12 here, we would have had to have plus 6 and plus 6, because we would have wanted 6x plus 6x. Well, 6 times 6 is 36, so our c value here is 36. Second one, x squared plus 10x plus c. Well, in order for us to have the 10x here, it would have been x plus 5 times x plus 5, because then we would have had 5x plus 5x, would have given us our 10x. 5 times 5 is 25. Now, one way that you can always get the c value without even thinking of that step is you can take that middle term. That middle term is called the b term, which comes from ax squared plus bx plus c. So that b term, you can divide it by 2 and then square it. And that's essentially what we did here. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 6 squared is 36. 10 divided by 2 is 5. 5 squared is 25. So this is how you find that c term to make it a perfect square. So that's what we're going to try doing next. So we're going to solve by using completing the square. So to complete the square, what we do is we just get our x squared and our x alone. So in this case, we're going to have to add the 20 to the other side. You're going to leave a blank spot there. Next, after you have your x squared and your x alone, you then complete the square. So 8 is right now our b term. So we're going to take 8 and divide it by 2 and square that number. 8 divided by 2 is 4, and 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to add 16. Now, so that I don't change my equation, if I add 16 to the left-hand side of the equation, I better add 16 to the right-hand side of the equation. Now, I added 16 to make this factorable to a perfect square. It factors to x plus 4 times x plus 4. Or we can just write it as x plus 4 squared. This is equal to 20 plus 16 is 36. From here, I can then do the square root property. Take the square root of both sides. So x plus 4 is equal to plus or minus. The square root of 36 is 6. Subtract 4 to both sides. So x is negative 4 plus or minus 6. So we have negative 4 plus 6, which gives us a positive 2. Negative 4 minus 6, which gives us a negative 10. So our two solutions here are negative 10 and positive 2. We're going to do another example. This time we have x squared plus 2x plus 6 equals 0. So we're going to complete the square. So first we want just the x squared and the x alone. So x squared plus 2x, leave an empty spot. We subtracted the 6 over, so equals negative 6. After we have the square alone, then we want to complete the square. So here our b term is 2, so we're going to do 2 divided by 2 and square it. 2 divided by 2 is 1, 1 squared is 1. So we are going to want to add 1 to both sides of the equation. We did that so that we would have a perfect square factored here. This factors to x plus 1 times x plus 1, or x plus 1 squared, is equal to negative 6 plus 1 is negative 5. From here, we would do the square root property. So we would take the square root of both sides. So we now have x plus 1 is equal to plus or minus the square root of negative 5. Well, the square root of a negative number automatically means we have I and then square root of 5, because we can't simplify that down any further. Then to get the x alone, we'd subtract 1 from both sides. So our x here would be equal to negative 1 plus or minus I square root of 5. And that would be as simple as we could go. And we will do one last example on this. 2x squared minus 5x plus 3 equals 0. So first off, we want to make sure we get the x squared and the x alone. So 2x squared minus 5x, and then here we would subtract the 3 to the other side of the equation. Now, the perfect square only works if our x squared is alone as well. So currently our x squared has a 2 attached to this. So what we can do to get rid of the 2 is we can divide both sides of the equation by 2. Then we have x squared minus 5 halves x equals a negative 3 halves. Now our b term is 5 halves. We're going to want to first divide that by 2 and then square it. Well, 5 halves divided by 2 is the same as 5 halves times 1 half, or 5 fourths. 5 fourths squared is 25 sixteenths. So we are going to add on 25 sixteenths to both sides of the equation. We did this so that the left-hand side would factor to x minus 5/4 times x minus 5/4. We know that would be 5/4 there because that's what we got when we took the 5/2 and divided it by 2. Or x minus 5/4 squared is equal to, now we need to add negative 3/2 plus 25/16. So 25/16 has a denominator of 16. So if I want negative 3/2 to have a denominator of 16, I would times top and bottom by 8, which would give me negative 24/16. So when I add those together, I get 1/16. Or you could simply use your calculator. Now from here, we could use the square root property and take the square root of both sides, which leaves us with x minus 5/4 is equal to plus or minus. The square root of 1/16 would be 1/4, because the square root of 1 is 1, square root of 16 is 4. And then to get the x alone, I would add 5/4 to both sides. So my x is 5/4 plus or minus 1/4. Well, this gives me 5/4 plus 1/4, which would be 6/4, or simplified down as 3/2. And the other one is 5/4 minus 1/4, which would be 4/4, simplified down would be 1. So your two solutions here would be 1 and 3/2. And that is how you complete the square.